Hello, and welcome to Module 3. Module 3 covers civil rights and civil liberties. That's chapters 4 and 5 in your textbook. I think that this is one of the most interesting of the sections that we have in the course. When we talk about civil rights and civil liberties, one of the big questions that we tend to ask is where exactly these rights and liberties come from. Do civil rights come from government? Are they the beneficence of a wonderful government who cares for us? Or are really civil rights something that are secured by people through their activities and their relationship with the government and sort of their demand? When we talk about civil rights, we're often talking about a historical development of these rights. We talk a little bit about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. You should be familiar with these. Follow a lot related to the key terms. We are concerned with the Due Process Clause. We're concerned with the Equal Protection Clause, both in the 14th Amendment, and I strongly encourage you to look at the key terms related to these. I'm particularly interested in the right to vote and ways that especially southern states, but other states as well, limited the right to vote for African Americans prior to about 1965 in the Voting Rights Act. So we'll look at concepts like the white primary, the literacy test, and the poll tax. Actually, in Georgia, one of the primary ways that government kept African Americans from voting prior to recent times was a property ownership requirement. So if you were to not own property, you wouldn't be able to vote. One of the big myths, I think, in American politics is this idea of the importance of the grandfather clause. Trust me, the main way that people overcame the literacy test requirement to register to vote wasn't that they said 2 generations ago we were respected members of society, but now I'm coming here to tell you that I'm illiterate and please let me vote anyway. The real way is that if you were a respected member of society, the person who was administering the literacy test just lied and said you passed it. And if there were people they didn't want to have vote, particularly African Americans, they lied and said you failed. So let's not overplay this concept of the grandfather clause. It was important you had a grandfather they liked, I suppose, but it wasn't as legal as everybody likes to pretend it was. As we move over from civil rights to civil liberties, we're going to pay a lot more attention to actual provisions of the U.S. Constitution. I've listed in Module 3 a list of civil liberties that are in the U.S. Constitution. Now you might ask yourself, what is the difference between civil rights and civil liberties? And as we use it in this class, and as it's usually used in social science and today, as opposed to 200 some years ago, a civil liberty is a protection from the actions of government. Civil liberties are things that government is not allowed to take away from you, at least in principle. We tended to talk about these 200 years ago. They talked about them as immunities, things that government couldn't do to you. Also, when they wrote the Bill of Rights, they were consciously using a term from England, from Great Britain, and the civil rights, the Bill of Rights actually doesn't list civil rights. The Bill of Rights lists civil liberties or protections from the government. Now, civil rights are protections of concepts like equality and justice by the government. Things that the government is expected to do for you rather than things that government's prohibited from doing to you. Civil rights, an old-fashioned term for this would be privileges, things that you could do because the government was privileging your activities. Anyway, civil liberties, there's a lot of civil liberties listed specifically in the Constitution. When you think about it, it makes sense, right? The Constitution lists the things that government can do, lists the things that government can't do. When you talk about the things that government is expected to do for you, oftentimes these are provisions that have been passed into law, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act. The number of civil rights that are specifically mentioned in the Constitution is much less. Now, there's some debate, right, in American politics, just how crucial the Bill of Rights, the list of civil rights and civil liberties are to American society. After all, when you think about it, there are many countries in the world, both historically and today, who have much more extensive lists of what government can and can't do to you. And the question becomes, just how important are they? Just how many civil rights and civil liberties do you have? Is it because it's written on paper, or is it because it's practiced? And those who argue that having fancy words on paper is not a protection, people who note that the USSR or North Korea all have lists of protections from the government, and in reality, you get your civil rights and civil liberties when there's somebody somewhere willing to help you enforce those. And if that is your argument, then you think it's much more important that we have something like federalism, so that you can go to the state or to the U.S. government to seek redress, or that we have separation of powers so that you can go to the courts or Congress or the executive branch seeking a redress. That's an interesting question. We'll have you watch a video called Rising from the Rails about the International Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. A really interesting group. The first African American union that was, first union run by African Americans that was recognized by the American Federation of Labor. And I think that as such, they tended to take a prominent role in the early civil rights movement, up to and including the organization of the March on Washington that kind of brought Martin Luther King to the attention of, to all Americans. He had certainly been famous for his activities during the 1950s. If you were to if you were to want to get a little bit more of an idea of the actual language used by Martin Luther King, I've included a very, very good speech that he gave called A Knock at Midnight. The reason I included this is so many people wonder whether he actually said much more than I have a dream, right? That's the sanitized story that you're all given a sentence or two. A Knock at Midnight is a very much more compelling, in my opinion. It might not necessarily impact your grade, but it might impact your thinking. Try very hard to space that out a little bit. I always figure the module quiz should be the last thing you do. You've gathered all of the information, everything you need to know, and then you take it. So most of us did very, very well, especially most of us who completed the first two modules are doing very well in the course. I'm a little bit concerned for a couple of you who've not completed all of the activities thus far. Knock on wood, you all have another day as I record this to complete Module 2. After that, if you've missed material in the first couple weeks, I strongly encourage you to contact me. Pay a lot of attention to the key terms. The book's there for your reading. I strongly encourage you to do so. And if you have those down, you should do fairly well on the quiz. actually better than fairly well. It's my goal that if you look at the slides, you look at the quiz, you listen to this discussion, that you should be able to get a on the quizzes. We will release a study guide for the midterm that should help you in any case. If you aren't seeing that in the next couple weeks, you should contact me. If anybody has if anybody has a disability that's been documented from the Student Disability Services, I strongly recommend you contact me. What an appropriate time, we're talking about civil rights and civil liberties. It is for you to contact me, but then for me to provide you with the benefit that you need in order to do as well as you possibly can in the course. Well, in any case, I wish you all well, and perhaps more than that, I just wish you all a very positive and happy next couple weeks. Thank you.